Hi there. So after lunch, I'd just like to start with a couple of thank yous. Firstly, thank you for giving me the opportunity to come to Istanbul to talk to you. It's a really, really exciting topic. The second one I'd like to say is a thank you for everybody who's just come in the room and is now facing this way, because I would much rather be looking out of that window. The scene is much more beautiful. It's actually only the second time I've ever been to Budapest. Sorry, where am I? Istanbul. The last time I came to Istanbul was actually for a conference on market research, and it was inside this hotel. There is one huge difference that a lot of colleagues have remarked on between this and other conferences. The last conference I came was entirely populated by people who were not from Turkey. And I'd say the one thing is trying to win the audience on side. The big difference here is that the audience is far more stylish than at any other research conference I've been to in the world. The topic of innovation inside research. The very eagle-eyed will spot up there that the title of my presentation today has actually changed a little bit. And we'll come on to talk about why it's changed a little bit later on. Last Sunday morning, there was a very misleading article written in the Sunday Times newspaper in the UK about Ipsos Mori in the UK exposing privacy details of consumers, which was incredibly misleading. Because any of the research that we've published in this area has been deeply anonymized and also aggregated, and we have never actually exposed personal details. However, as a result of that story, we've needed to change certain aspects of this topic. Before we begin, and we'll catch up on that later, thinking about where we will be in 10 years, we've seen presentations this morning on social media. We've seen presentations this morning on big data. As an industry, researchers, for very good reasons, can often be slightly against change. And I was just wondering, before we begin, if we could have a quick show of hands. If we cast our mind forward 10 years, who in the room is optimistic about the role that research will play in working through and finding insight and information for people? So who here is optimistic about where we're going to go? Okay, that's not a lot. Who here is pessimistic about the role that researchers and research agencies will be playing in the world as we go forward? So who's negative about it? Okay, so about 1/3 pessimistic, 1/3 optimistic, and 1/3 either still digesting lunch or not listening to me. Okay, so I think it's my job to try and convince you otherwise. And I'm going to try and convince you of my own optimism by going through 3 different messages. So the first message I want to talk about is just really to plant ourselves in a little bit in what's going on in the outside world. So I want to look at the revolution that is taking place in consumer behavior, specifically about our relationship with the internet. And I use the word relationship very deliberately. The second topic that I want to do is I want to show how we, using research tools, can give our clients, using 2 case studies, the ability to harness and understand and utilize this change in consumer behavior. So the first case study is going to be using what for the rest of today will be called our researcher's friend in the pocket. And the second case study will be touching on how we can use behavioral big data to bring new understanding and new meaning about consumer behavior. The third topic that I want to touch on, which I think is probably the most critical, subject to recent events, is what the role of research companies is. My own personal view is that if we look back to 1996, there were generally 3 ways of gaining information from consumers. If we look to 2006, along came online research, and there were suddenly 4 ways. My belief is that if we look to 2016, there'll be 5 ways, 6 ways, 7 ways, 8 ways, 9 ways. However, companies and public bodies, etc., will still have the same questions that they need answering. And I think researchers and the core skills inside our industry are perfectly positioned to answer those questions. Now, so the first topic is really going to be about the speed of mobilization. Now, so today is 15th of May, 2013. I quite often get years wrong. So let's just sort of plant ourselves in the now a little bit. Who in the room today, and again, I'm afraid it's a show of hands, don't worry, it's not going to be audience participation day, but but who in the room today has looked at, all day, an online publication, be it a newspaper, be it a blog, be it a magazine? Okay, so quite, okay, the majority. Who in the room has looked at social media today? So Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, the vast majority. Okay, who in the room today, who's looking at social media now, or has looked at social media in the last 10 minutes? Okay, now, so let's think about that, and we'll come back to that point. So we'll come back to here and think about where we take it forward. So mobile phones. A statistic that we all know, well, many of us will know, is that across the world, 4 babies are born every single second. Slightly mind-boggling. Sometimes, if you ever want to feel smaller in the world, there's a clock on the internet that counts down the population, counts up the population. It shows how inconsequential we are. A slightly better statistic is that every second, 53 mobile phones are born. So in 2012, industry estimates are there are 1.7 billion mobile phones made in the world. It's one of the fastest growing technologies that has ever been had. However, we haven't actually seen any part of it yet. For one part, the smartphone revolution, as it were, even in some of the most advanced countries in the world with the highest penetrations, has only just crossed 50 or 60% if we remove some of the outlying countries. So what effect is this going to have on us? Now, so if we plant ourselves back in 15th of May 2013, okay, 6 years ago, so go back to summer of 2007, was the launch of the iPhone. So we'd have asked that same question, and I appreciate that there are other handset providers, but if we asked that same question 6 years ago, back here, how many of us would have looked at social media already today? How many of us would have read online magazines already today? Probably none of us. What has taken place in the last 6 years is a complete change in our relationship with the internet. Our relationship with the internet has gone from being a linear relationship where you sit down in front of, 6 years ago, predominantly a desktop computer, look at a site, reference it and move on, to a relationship where it is constantly updating us with information around the world. Majority of us in the room probably have a smartphone in their pocket, when there's automatic processes going on right now to make sure that we have the weather news, the currency exchange rate fluctuations, to make sure that we know whether our auntie is on holiday in some far-off destination, and all of the important information that we need to know. Now, let's cast our mind forward 6 years. So let's go through to the 15th of May 2019, and where will consumer behaviour be here? Well, okay, none of us know. I'm not a futurologist either. My suspicion being is that the notebook computer, of which there aren't many on desks in front of us, will be dead. Yep. Nobody will ever use it anymore. Most of the information that we use will be stored in the cloud. We will access it through different devices wherever they are. Now, this, for anybody who wants to communicate with consumers, citizens, or what have you, is going to give one of the biggest challenges we've ever known. So last year, the Facebook IPO basically failed because they hadn't got mobile yet. Come forward to this year, their Q1 profits were massively, I think 40% up, I can't remember the exact figure, because they had worked out mobile advertising. This problem is going to go through everybody who wants to try and communicate and try and understand consumers and citizens better. And I'm afraid the answer isn't, have you got an app for that? So research in the UK will show that on average, we download about 25 apps, but we only use 4. So the actual areas of communication that we use are getting narrower and narrower. And I think our challenge is how can research help build our understanding of where we're going for 2019. So we're going to use 2 case studies here, one of which about our friend in the pocket and one of which big data, to show how the same old skills that we use inside research all the way can help us to understand this shift in behavior. So we live in an increasingly fragmented world. If you were doing a brand tracking study a number of years ago, it would have been based on a number of touch points that it asked you about. However, research continuously shows that when talking about a brand, 80% of consumer touchpoints are consumer generated. So whether that's word of mouth, whether it's social media, etc. But the real challenge is that the number of touchpoints is increasing by the day. Arguably, I'm a bit more of a digital native than the average. Every day I hear of a new social media site, and I have got no idea what it is. Quickly have to go on Google and check out what it is. So for brands and for anyone wanting to communicate, we're living in an increasingly fragmented world, which is getting harder and harder to understand. So how can we understand this? We need to react much quicker. So we need to be able to react in real time. Brands need to be able to assess what's going across all of the touch points and in a way that fits with our participants' digital lives. And our friend in the pocket is obviously a perfect tool for doing this. The friend in the pocket is with us all of the time. So if we want to understand how consumers are relating to all of the touch points that affect that brand, it's not much use to ask them or it's challenging to ask them many hours after the situation what touch points they're exposed to. Our friend in the pocket allows you to conduct research live and in the moment and ask questions. Now, I appreciate there are some research theorists in the room who will be thinking right now, but the only message that matters is the resonance and the message at the end of the program. And your in-the-moment experience isn't important because what matters is what you've recalled a week later. And I would argue that both are actually required. You both need to understand in the moment from the consumer what they've been exposed to and the short-term impact, and then the rationalized series system 2 thinking later on down the lane. So this is just one example picking on. So this is what we call a brand shout study done in the UK. This can be done in any market around the world as long as people have got smartphones. We ask the respondents to conduct a fairly brief online survey to ask them about their exposure to the category, etc. And then we ask them over a period of 6 to 7 days to record every single time they are exposed to the category. And the responses can be quite astounding. Just one example being, once we've removed outliers, we've got consumers who have conducted over 60 touch points over 6 to 7 days, which each survey takes 1.5 minutes to conduct. They don't even realize they've done it. However, they've given us at the end of the week nearly 2 hours of surveying where they've given us their location and what they experienced. So in this study, it's done for a drinks brand. The brand is Bacardi, and they wanted to understand the touch points that consumers were being exposed to across London during a week that they were doing a campaign. So here are some sort of top-line statistics. So the old above-the-line and beneath-the-line advertising represented 15% of the touch points that consumers were exposed to during that week. Shop advertising, 19%, online, 28%. The incredible thing, 4 out of 10 touch points to do with alcoholic beverages were conducted in a bar. Because we're asking people in the moment, we can ask very quickly, by the touch of a button, further questions. And it appears that the biggest influence was peer pressure in the situation. So 44% of touch points that happen in the point of sale was actually your friend explaining to you that this is a good drink. Second of which is the bartender, pointing out the importance to this particular brand of dealing with your trade customer. But we can even go deeper than that. And we can look at the individual verbatim conversations that drove people to make the decision. So the question being to the consumers is, why did you make that decision? Why did you buy that particular one? And you can see the verbatims that come back. And verbatims bring us on to a very important part, because in research there's obviously two sides, one of which is the customers of research companies who have the questions. But a far more critical part of the mix are the participants in research. Gaining hold of the participants in research is getting harder and harder. Sorry, one last point, we'll come back to the participants. The other thing is that this very in the moment can then go to even in greater depth. So when we asked what were the #1 brands that they were exposed to inside bars, the #1 brand that came across in the UK during February of this year was Disaronno, which I'm afraid I don't know the structure of the Turkish drinks industry well enough, but I hope to by the end of this evening. But Disaronno is a very small, minor brand in the UK. And the reason being is that this study was actually done deliberately during the British Film and TV Awards, where Dusarono was the official cocktail. So this sort of approach can bring out levels of insight and levels of knowledge that isn't possible in a standard brand tracking survey. However, often much more powerful if done in cahoots with them. And I think the critical part is, as I mentioned earlier, some of the hardest parts of research is engaging consumers and making research rewarding for consumers. And we found that when we originally started doing these app-based surveys, we were expecting a dropout rate of about 7 to 8% a day over a 7-day period of time. In actual fact, we've had a 7% dropout rate in some of the studies over 6 to 7 days. So the participants have kept with the study and have kept a similar response rate, a recall rate of touch points that they've touched. Even to the point where, if you look at the feedback of participants after the research, I'd like to point out the amount of them that talked about a fun and enjoyable experience. And I think it's a very important thing for us as an industry to make sure that the research that we're conducting with consumers is fun and enjoyable. Now, so that's, I think, one case study of how the friend in our pocket can help layer far deeper insights than approaches that we've used before. However, we are in new worlds, and new worlds need new approaches and partnerships. The case study I was due to talk about today was supposed to be talking about how the insights that we showed from people, behavioral data at the Olympics Games, people talking to Olympics parks. Unfortunately, on Sunday morning, the Sunday Times newspaper printed on page 1, page 2, and page 14 that Ipsos Mori in the UK sells the secrets of our mobile phone, of 27 mobile phones customers to the Metropolitan Police. An incredibly deeply misleading article. We had met with the police, but we had met with the police to talk about the power of behavioral data, which is aggregated, anonymized population flows of one place to another. We're doing this through a partnership that we have with the UK's largest mobile carrier, Everything Everywhere, who own 3 brands in the UK. They own T-Mobile, Orange, and the EE brand. And we've been working on this for about 18 months. And it's our skills as researchers in the ability to ask research questions and the ability to protect respondents' privacy, which has meant EE want to work with us as a partner. And I think if you look across the world, there are other mobile operators working with other market research companies in the same sphere. Now, I picked this off the plane. I'm reading a book at the moment by Eric Schmidt and Jared Cohen, extracted from the New Digital Age. And I'm actually going to read the whole quote, but I'll read it quite slowly because I want you to answer the question, what do you think they're referring to? So, it is an omnipresent and endlessly multifaceted outlet for human energy. It is at once intangible and in a constant state of mutation, growing larger and more complex with each passing second. It is a source for tremendous good and potentially dreadful evil, and we're only just beginning to witness its impact on the world stage. And I'll just repeat the last bit. It is a source for tremendous good and potentially dreadful evil, and we're only just beginning to witness its impact on the world stage. Any idea what we're talking about? Okay, so it's a book about the internet. Yeah? And this is Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google's belief on where we are with the internet. And I think this is exactly where we are in terms of research with the internet. Online behavioral data, whether it's social media data, whether it's big data, can do tremendous good. It can bring us new insights. However, it can also do dreadful evil if put in the wrong hands, if people don't follow the correct privacy rules, etc. So much so that if you went to Ipsos Mori, our UK business's website, you would find this statement on the front page. I won't read the statement to you in detail, but it's such an important point, and probably the most important slide. I have some notes. I think the key bit is that we as an industry, the market research industry in every country, all of us sign up to charters and local codes. Local codes may differ, but at the core of the market research code of conduct is anonymity, and respect for the respondent is the core value in every piece of research. And I think that when we're working with behavioral data and big data, respect for the individual is core. Now, in a lot of big data work, whether it's social media work, whether it's behavioral data of telephone systems, we may not have got the agreement of the participant and opted in to take part in that research. And the research that we're about to see, the participants have not opted in to do it. However, we have been very careful with all the relevant legal and regulatory requirements to ensure that no personal data is used. So all of the data that we're using is anonymized and aggregated. I just need to make that quite clear. So what I will do now, I have 1 or 2 slides, 3 slides on the big data work that we're doing. I appreciate that that is 1 slide at the front of what is a big room, so I will talk through what the case study is actually showing us. So now this case study may not be extremely relevant in Turkey. So it's the final day of the 2012 Six Nations rugby tournament. Okay, so that's equivalent of the Euro for footballs, but done every year. On the 17th of March, which, as will be important later on, is St. Patrick's Day, the patron saint of Ireland. The games are in Twickenham, in West London. We have got Ireland versus England, and in Cardiff, shown here in the south of Wales, is Wales versus France. So what we did is the day after the match, and you can begin to see some parallels of how this can help researchers, but this is just an internal case study. The day after the match, we identified all of the cell towers, so the radio masts, that cover the 2 respective grounds. We then identified all of the mobile phones that were used or were located in that ground in the 2 hours around the game. We then identified all of the mobile phones that were used in the same area the day before, the day after, or a week before, so that we could isolate and remove anybody who worked in the ground or whose home was just too close to identify. So the first research fact of the day is inside Twickenham Stadium, which is always represented in the pink, we found 30,192 mobile phones. That represents exactly 40% of the attendance of the ground, and fortuitously, EE's customers, Everything Everywhere's customers, represent 40% of the UK population. Pretty good. We then went on and looked inside the Millennium Stadium, where we found 32,774. I've mentioned that number before because I can't remember numbers. 32,774 mobile phones, again, which was exactly 40% of the attendance inside the Millennium Stadium. The next thing we did, by grouping together the postal addresses of those mobile phones, we were able to identify the top 10 towns in the country where people inside those stadiums had come from, where they live. What we were also able to do by looking at their mobile phone signals is look at where those people have worked. So by identifying their mobile phone signals at 10:30 in the morning for the previous Thursday and Friday, you could see where their working patterns were. So in the Millennium Stadium in Cardiff, 37% of the attendees worked in Cardiff. In Twickenham Stadium in southwest London, only 5% of the audience in Twickenham Stadium lived and worked in southwest London. Worked in southwest London. So we could start to sort of build up a picture of who was there. Where it begins to become far more powerful is we could also build up a picture of where they had been that day and the journey they'd taken. So we looked at the top 10 locations in the UK that people had come to. And this is where we first came up with something that was quite interesting. So the number 1 town of people inside the London Stadium was Cheltenham in west of the UK, just on the border with Wales. Cheltenham's an incredibly small town, population of under 100,000, and yet we'd found over 5,500 people who'd been at 9 o'clock in the morning in Cheltenham and were now inside Twickenham Stadium. When we looked at that in more detail, under the old adage, obviously the research adage that anything that's interesting is definitely wrong, we examined the area of Cheltenham in more detail and found that 3,500 people had met at Cheltenham Racecourse the previous day. Quick Google confirmed that there had been no horse racing at Cheltenham the day. However, the previous day had been the Cheltenham Golf Festival. The Cheltenham Golf Festival is a huge horse racing event where a massive Irish contingent go and watch the horse racing, and what we'd obviously identified is that the Irish, it being St. Patrick's Day, their national day, were having a doubly large party and had been celebrating the night before in Cheltenham after the horse racing and had travelled down in coaches together to the game. What we're also able to identify are the key advertising and communication locations on the way. So where people had lingered on the way to the ground. So statistic in the top right over here is that of the people inside Twickenham Stadium, 2%, so about 1,700 people, had made a telephone call in front of the advertising hoardings at Waterloo Station. So you can sort of see that the power that this data can have. I've proved my drinking problem. Also, as well as being able to tell the journey that people have made and look at the live population movements of people, you're also able to have very detailed look at who made the journey to the ground. So the data at the bottom, again, I'm sure it's not clear enough, shows the age range of those, so the age split, showing a very young and slightly male audience in both areas. We can match that with segmentation data. So here, using the UK extensively, is mosaic data. The mosaic data showed a tale of two cities. The largest mosaic group in the Millennium Stadium was Ties of the Community, and the second one, Happy Families, sort of what we might use in English in a non-pejorative sense, the salt of the earth. In the Twickenham Stadium, the top two mosaic groups were Urban Intelligence and I can't even read my own chart, but another sort of high end. So it shows sort of different catchment that the same sporting event but done in a different city had. What you can also identify is what's their social media use. So over here, you can see the percentage who regularly use Google, Facebook, etc. In another study that we did, we were asked by a company which is in charge of the development of West London for business. We were asked to show what the pull of visitors to West London. So in this analysis, what we've done is we have compared three cities. So the spot at the top, which isn't coming out very clearly, is Edinburgh. The spot in the middle is Manchester, and the spot at the bottom is Oxford Circus in London. So we've looked at, over an important shopping week, who has visited there. And you can see, not very clearly, that when we look when we look at Manchester, the thickest line, the majority of people are coming from the northwest. Over 50% of people in Manchester are from the northwest of the country. Not surprisingly, Manchester's the biggest city in the northwest of England. We can also come up with the statistics of who's there. For Edinburgh, the thickest line, again, unsurprisingly, over 50% of the people shopping in Edinburgh are coming from Scotland. Edinburgh in Scotland, no great shakes there. What is interesting, though, is you can begin to see for Edinburgh, it's the second thickest line is actually people visiting from the southeast of the country. The next one, in London, and specifically looking at Oxford Circus, and you get a much different picture. So this is actually the line of people in Oxford Circus who have come from London. I think it's the fourth or the fifth thickest line. So what we've proved here is the most popular areas for people shopping in Oxford Circus are from the northwest, the northeast, and the southeast, which sounds at first counterintuitive. Why would one of London's busiest shopping centres have no Londoners in it? Has anyone here actually been to Oxford Circus? Yeah. If you ask Londoners, you'll get not many responses because the place is a complete dump. So where do we go from here? Well, where do we as researchers think that we fit in? I think that the skills that we have as researchers in interpreting a client's question, in finding the correct methodology for that question, in sampling understanding, in quantifying the data, and then applying that methodology to an answer, actually places us perfectly for the future. So when it comes to big data, my colleague Charles earlier on showed some real depth about how researchers are adding value to that. There are repeatedly conferences in London on big data where IT companies get up and talk about the hardware required for it. But I think it takes the skills that we have as researchers to turn that into gold. The case for change, I think, is fairly enormous. In some markets in the world, I think if we stick to the methodologies that we know today, yes, we may well be a smaller industry and a smaller body of knowledge than we are today in 10 years' time. But I think if we adapt and bring our expertise, our understanding about consumer behaviour, and our understanding about concerns such as privacy to the marketplace, then we as an industry will be able to grow moving forwards. So I think that's, thank you very much.